I grew up in northern Utah, in a house where every wall had a framed scripture verse, and every conversation circled back to family, faith, or modesty. Being the second oldest of 6 kids meant money was always stretched thin. At 17, I had no car, no savings, and no way to buy even simple things without asking my parents. That was when I started looking for jobs online. Nothing big, just babysitting, cleaning, odd chores. I wasn't supposed to use Craigslist. My mom called it a den of scams. But I figured if I just looked under the domestic gigs section, what could go wrong? That's where I saw the ad. It was simple. Condo needs light cleaning. 2 to 3 hours, $80 cash. Flexible schedule. Email if interested. $80 for a couple hours sounded almost too good, but I told myself people just valued convenience. The poster's email signature was Mason. He replied within an hour of my message. His tone was polite, maybe a little too casual, with smiley faces at the end of sentences. Hey Emily, thanks for reaching out. I like to keep things neat, but my schedule is crazy. I'll show you what needs to be done, nothing too hard. You'll do fine. Smiley face. I didn't think much of it. Honestly, I felt flattered that he trusted me with his space. The emails kept going back and forth. Mason asked about my schedule, if I had a car, if I lived alone or with family. I thought those were normal questions until he asked, could you come by after 8 p.m.? I'm usually home then, and it's just easier if you don't bring anyone. That made me pause. Who specifies don't bring anyone? I brushed it off. Maybe he just didn't want roommates or friends tagging along. When I mentioned the job to my older brother Nathan, he frowned immediately. Craigslist? A stranger's condo? At night? He shook his head. No way you're going alone. I argued. I wanted independence. I wanted money. But Nathan refused. He said if I was dead set on going, he was driving me. I emailed Mason saying my brother would drop me off. His reply came fast. No need. Just come alone. It's better that way. Smiley face. Something about that smiley face made my stomach clench. Nathan saw the email too, and that was the end of discussion. He was coming with me, no matter what. The condo complex was newer, the kind with identical beige buildings and trimmed little hedges. We parked in front of the unit Mason had given. The porch light was off, though every other condo on the street had theirs glowing. Before we even got out of the car, the front door opened. A man stepped out, tall, maybe mid-40s, well-groomed, but with this uneasy stiffness in his posture. He had on pressed slacks and a fitted shirt, like he was dressed for a casual dinner date. He smiled when he saw me, but his eyes went flat when he noticed Nathan. You must be Emily, he said, ignoring my brother completely. His voice was smooth but practiced, like someone rehearsing friendliness. I wasn't expecting company. Nathan didn't budge. Yeah, I'm her ride. Mason's smile tightened. Well, that's fine. You can wait in the car. Emily, why don't you come inside? I'll show you the place. I froze halfway out the passenger seat. Something in his tone had shifted, a sharpness under the friendliness, a tiny crack in the mask. Nathan answered for me. She's not going in alone. Mason's eyes flicked to him, then back to me, softer again. I just prefer privacy. You understand. You're getting paid, after all. It's perfectly safe. The words, perfectly safe, landed wrong, like someone telling you not to think about an accident while handing you car keys. Nathan shut his door and walked around to my side. Yeah, we're leaving. I wanted to protest, wanted to not look stupid or childish, but the longer I looked at Mason's face, the more uneasy I felt. His smile had vanished, leaving something cold and assessing. Wait, Mason said sharply, stepping off the porch. His eyes locked on me, not Nathan. Emily, listen. This is easy money. Just a couple of hours. Don't let him control your decisions. That last part cut deep, because it was exactly what I'd been telling myself about Nathan. But hearing it from a stranger, with that urgency, made my skin crawl. Nathan grabbed my arm and steered me toward the car. Mason didn't move to block us, but he didn't go back inside either. He just stood there, watching, his face unreadable. We drove away in silence. When I finally turned to look back, Mason was still on the sidewalk, his figure shrinking in the rearview mirror, standing perfectly still under the dark porch light. 2 days later, Nathan shoved his phone in front of me. It was a news article. Local man under investigation for human trafficking. There was Mason's photo, smiling in a police lineup. The article said he'd been recruiting young women through domestic job postings on Craigslist. Several had gone missing after answering. He was already a suspect in multiple cases. My blood went cold. I couldn't stop replaying the image of him at his doorway, his eyes flicking between me and my brother. I thought about what would have happened if Nathan hadn't insisted on driving me. Would Mason have invited me in, locked the door behind me, and vanished me into whatever network he was running? Every night for weeks, I dreamed of that doorway. I dreamed of walking in alone, the door shutting, and realizing too late I was trapped. I never answered another Craigslist ad. Even now, I still see his face sometimes, not smiling, not frowning, just watching as if he knows something I don't. And the most terrifying part is realizing he watched me leave like I was a prize he'd nearly caught, and I'll never know how close I came to being another girl who didn't come back. Most kids in my town grew up hearing not to mess around near the textile factory. It sat at the edge of Main Street where the asphalt turned into cracked industrial roads. The place had been closed since before I was born, shutters bolted, windows smashed, and weeds forcing up through the parking lot. Our teachers warned us about tetanus and drugs. Our parents warned us about squatters, but really it was just one of those places everyone forgot about. I didn't. It was part of my shortcut. Every time I left my friend Luke's house, I cut past the factory, through the broken fence, and onto the dirt path that led home. If I walked the long way, it meant 30 minutes along the main roads. Through the factory shortcut, I could be home in 12. By junior year, I'd taken it so many times it barely registered. Until that night. The sky was low and heavy with storm clouds, the kind that swallow the moon, so the whole town feels dim. I was walking fast, earbuds in, backpack slung over one shoulder. That's when I heard it. At first I thought it was just feedback in the song, a distorted high note. But then I pulled an earbud out and heard it again. A scream. It wasn't just loud. It was real, the kind of sound that shoots straight into your chest. A woman's voice, ragged and sharp, rising then cutting off like someone had clamped a hand over her mouth. I froze, halfway across the cracked lot. My stomach dropped. Every rational thought told me to leave. Run home. Pretend I hadn't heard. I actually turned back toward the road, ready to keep walking. But then another scream came, higher, more desperate. And I couldn't. I shoved my phone into my hand, thumb hovering over the flashlight, and walked toward the side entrance. The metal door sagged on its hinges, rust bleeding down the frame. When I pushed it open, it let out this groan that echoed down the halls like the whole building waking up. Inside, the air was stale and damp. Dust coated everything, and the floor was scattered with broken glass and paint chips. The beam from my phone's flashlight shook as I raised it, cutting through shadows. I whispered, "Hello," even though I didn't want an answer. The scream came again, muffled now, like it was deeper in the building. I followed it. The hallway stretched forever, lined with lockers rusted shut and doors hanging crooked. My sneakers crunched with every step. The sound seemed so loud in that silence that I winced each time. I kept telling myself it was stupid, that maybe it was kids messing around, or an animal, or even just my imagination. But then I heard something new. A voice. Low, angry. A man's. Too far away to make out words, but sharp, like someone hissing threats. I crept closer, pulse thundering in my ears. The hallway opened into a wide room. Maybe a workshop once, or a loading bay. My light skimmed across machines draped in sheets, old pallets, a broken ladder. That's when it landed on them. A man stood in the middle of the room, broad shoulders hunched, a welding mask covering his face. In his hands, a hammer raised high. On the floor beneath him, a woman struggled, her hands weakly clawing at the ground. She let out a hoarse cry that sliced through me. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just blurted the first thing that came to mind. I recorded everything. The cops are already on their way. My voice cracked, but it echoed through the vast space. The man froze. The hammer stayed in the air. Slowly, mechanically, he turned his head toward me. The black glass of his mask hid his eyes, but I felt them anyway, drilling into me, weighing if I was bluffing. My phone trembled in my hand. Seconds stretched. 5, 10. Then, he lowered the hammer. One step back. Another. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He just melted into the shadows at the far end of the room until my flashlight couldn't find him anymore. The woman whimpered, curling in on herself. I wanted to rush to her, but my legs wouldn't move. My throat was tight with panic. I managed to fumble my phone, thumb shaking as I hit 911. Emergency services. What's your... There's a man in the factory. He's got a hammer. He was attacking. I could barely get the words out. The dispatcher told me to stay calm, stay on the line, but I was already backing away, eyes locked on the shadows where the masked man had gone. My chest hurt with every breath. I bolted. I didn't stop until I was outside, sucking in the night air like I'd been drowning. I pressed myself against the fence, hands shaking so hard my phone almost slipped. The wail of sirens rose in the distance. Red and blue lights strobed across the cracked walls within minutes. Officers spilled out, flashlights cutting through the factory as they moved inside. I tried to tell them what I'd seen, my words tumbling over each other. They nodded, but I saw the doubt in their eyes. And when they came back out, their faces confirmed it. "No one's here, son," one officer said. "No signs of anyone." I insisted, over and over. The mask, the hammer, the screams. But all they found was dust, broken glass, and rad droppings. "Maybe it was kids pulling a prank," another said. "Sound carries strangely in places like this." I wanted to scream at them. I knew what I saw. The woman's scream followed me home that night, rattling in my head like it was still echoing down the factory halls. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the way the man had turned toward me, the emptiness of that mask. Days passed, then weeks. The cops never called back. My friends said I'd made it up or overreacted. But one evening, I couldn't help it. I took the shortcut again. The factory loomed the same, empty windows staring. I told myself I'd just walk by, eyes forward, nothing more. But as I passed, something pulled me to glance up. And there he was, a figure in a welding mask, perfectly still in one of the second-floor windows, watching me. I blinked, heart slamming, but he didn't vanish. Then, faint, carried on the wind, came a scream. High-pitched, desperate, exactly the same as before. And this time, no matter how far I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that the factory wasn't empty at all. When I think back on my childhood, most memories are warm and ordinary. The dusty roads of the reservation, my cousins chasing each other barefoot in the summer, my grandmother humming while she braided my hair. But one memory is sharp, a shard I can't smooth out no matter how much time passes. I was 7 the day it happened. My mom had taken me into Rapid City for groceries and school clothes. We didn't get into town often, so the trip felt special. She let me wear my favorite turquoise beret, the one shaped like a butterfly, and I remember feeling proud, grown up even, walking beside her through the strip mall parking lot. The smell of asphalt baked in the sun mixed with fried food from the little diner nearby. It was just another errand, but for me it was adventure. The grocery store doors whooshed open, letting out a breath of cool air that smelled like citrus and disinfectant. My mom was focused, pushing the cart quickly, her list in one hand, coupons folded neatly in her wallet. I trailed behind, eyes darting from the shelves stacked with toys to the candy displays up front. That's when they appeared, a man and a woman, standing a few feet away, watching me with practiced smiles. They looked ordinary, like anyone else in that store. The man wore a polo tucked into pressed jeans. The woman had a denim jacket and hoop earrings that glinted in the fluorescent light. They didn't look dangerous. They looked nice. "Hi there," the woman said warmly. "What's your name?" Her voice was so soft, I didn't even think not to answer. "Marissa," I said shyly. The man crouched to my level, his blonde hair neatly combed, his teeth very white. "Marissa," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "That's a beautiful name." I remember blushing, twisting the hem of my shirt. The woman pointed at the stickers I had been touching. "You like those? We have something even better outside. Want to come see?" My heart fluttered with interest. At 7, the idea of something better was like a key turning in a lock. The man leaned in a little closer. "Just a minute. It's really cool. You'll love it." The woman extended her hand. Not fast, not aggressive. Palm up. Waiting. I stared at it. My foot shifted. In that second, I almost stepped forward. Then my mother's voice cracked like thunder. "Marissa." She was there in an instant, her hand clamping onto my arm and yanking me back so hard it made my shoulders sting. Her face was fierce, eyes blazing. I had never seen her like that. Furious, terrified, protective in a way that felt bigger than the whole world. The couple didn't argue. They didn't even look guilty. The woman smiled sweetly, the man stood, and together they walked toward the doors as calmly as if they'd just finished shopping. He even gave a small wave, like we were neighbors parting ways. I started crying, confused and shaken. My mom crouched down, gripping both my shoulders. Her voice trembled with anger. "Don't you ever go with strangers. Do you hear me? Ever?" I nodded, my throat tight. She pulled me close, and I buried my face in her shirt, but I couldn't stop looking at the doorway where the couple had disappeared. For a long time, I told myself maybe I'd misunderstood. Kids imagine things. Maybe they were just being friendly. That's what I wanted to believe. But the memory never left me. As I grew older, fragments returned. The way the man's eyes lingered, too focused. The woman's hand, patient and expectant. The feeling that they had rehearsed it, like a script they knew by heart. It wasn't until my 20s that the truth sank in. I was at a family cookout, my aunt talking about the old days, when she mentioned that strip mall. There were stories in the 90s, she said. Lots of them. People trying to snatch native kids. It happened more than once. The conversation moved on, but my stomach stayed twisted. I realized my mom hadn't overreacted. She'd intervened at exactly the right second. If she'd been one moment later, I would have gone with them. And I wouldn't be here. Now I'm 32, with 2 children of my own. My son is 10, my daughter 7, the same age I was. When I take them shopping, I can't relax. Other parents scroll their phones in checkout lines, let their kids wander down the aisle for cereal. Not me. My eyes never leave them. My hand never lets go. Every stranger feels like a danger. The cashier who compliments my daughter's braids. The old man who chuckles about my son's Spider-Man shirt. Even the woman behind us in line who smiles too long. I grip my daughter's hand so tightly she sometimes whines, "Mom, that hurts." I loosen my grip, ashamed, but the panic never leaves. Because I see 2 versions of myself. One, the life I have. Safe. Family. Ordinary worries about bills and school. The other, the version that walked through those sliding doors with a smiling couple, never to be seen again. That version never grew up. Sometimes, late at night, I wake in a cold sweat, dreaming of the woman's hand extended toward mine. I feel my daughter's small fingers in my palm, and I squeeze, terrified that if I let go, someone will take her just as easily as they almost took me. People talk about trauma as something sharp, like a wound. But mine feels like a shadow. It never leaves. It just waits, reminding me in subtle ways. Every trip to a store, every too friendly stranger, every second I can't find my daughter in a crowd. The couple at the mall are probably long gone now, faces blurred by time. But to me, they're frozen forever in that moment, smiling, ordinary, dangerous. And the truth I can never shake is that I was theirs for a heartbeat. One wrong step, and I would have been gone. My mom saved me, but the memory still owns me. When you're 15, you think you're invincible. Or at least, that's how I felt. I'd been warned about the park more times than I could count. My mom told me not to cut through it at night. My dad muttered about rough types hanging around there. Teachers shook their heads whenever kids brought it up. But I'd done it dozens of times, and nothing ever happened. That night, I was walking home from my mate Callum's. It was later than usual, almost 9, and the streets were quiet. The quickest way back to my estate was straight through the park. Going around meant another 20 minutes along the road. I was tired, and the idea of saving 20 minutes was enough to push every warning out of my mind. The park entrance yawned open between 2 stone pillars, the old iron gate stuck permanently ajar. The lamps inside gave off a weak orange glow, leaving long patches of shadow. I shoved my hands in my hoodie pocket and walked fast, eyes down, telling myself it was fine. Halfway across, I heard footsteps. I glanced up. 3 boys stepped onto the path ahead of me. Older, maybe 17, 18. Trackies, hoodies pulled up. One of them flicked his wrist, and a blade snapped open, catching the lamplight. My stomach dropped. "Phone. Wallet," the knife one said. His voice was flat, practiced, like he'd done this before. For a second, I thought about handing everything over. But something in me panicked. Instead of reaching for my pocket, I bolted. "Oi," one of them shouted. Then came the pounding of trainers behind me. I tore off the path and into the trees, branches clawing at my arms. My breath ripped in and out, chest burning. I could hear them crashing after me, their voices close, angry, laughing, hunting. The park woods weren't thick, but at night they felt endless. I ducked between trees, stumbled over roots, my legs shaking with adrenaline. Every sound made me flinch. The snap of twigs, the rustle of leaves, the metallic hiss of the knife, boys shouting behind me. "Get him!" I pushed harder, lungs on fire. My trainers slipped in the mud, nearly sending me sprawling. Somewhere behind, one of them cursed as he tripped. I zigzagged through the dark, praying they'd lose my trail. Finally, I burst through a hedge and landed hard on damp grass. I lay there, gasping, ears straining. Silence. No footsteps. No voices. I stayed low, forcing myself not to move, not to breathe too loud. Minutes passed. Slowly, my heartbeat eased from hammering panic to a sick, steady throb. When I was sure they weren't nearby, I got up and crept out of the park, keeping to the shadows until I reached the road. The walk home felt endless. Every car that passed made me flinch. Every figure in the distance looked like one of them. But I made it back. When I shut the front door behind me, relief washed over me so hard my knees buckled. I didn't tell my parents. I told myself it was fine, that I'd gotten away, that nothing more would happen if I just kept quiet. But later that night, I looked out of my bedroom window. At first, I thought the street was empty. The lamp across the road buzzed faintly, spilling a pool of pale light. Then my eyes adjusted. He was standing there. One of them. The knife boy. Hoodie down now, face plain as day. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't moving. Just standing under the lamppost, staring up at my window. My chest went cold. He raised his hand. For a second, I thought he might wave. But instead, he dragged his thumb slowly across his throat. A silent gesture, deliberate. Then he turned and walked away. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like him. Because it wasn't just the knife in the park that terrified me. It was the fact he knew exactly where I lived. And I knew this wasn't over. Most people don't think about the people who deliver their newspaper. They just expect it to be there in the morning, rolled tight, rubber band cutting into the paper, sitting on their step or half buried in the snow. For me, the quiet hours before dawn had always been my favorite time. I was 28, working part-time delivering papers to make ends meet while juggling temp jobs. The neighborhood I covered was a stretch of quiet Midwestern suburb, the kind of place with tidy lawns, basketball hoops above garage doors, and rows of identical mailboxes. I got to know the rhythms of the streets, which houses left their porch lights on, which ones had barking dogs, who was always up early warming their car. That winter had been brutal. Snowstorms rolled in week after week, dumping inches overnight. The plows never kept up, and the sidewalks turned into packed, icy trenches. I'd bundle up, thermals, hoodie, thick parka, 2 pairs of gloves, and still feel the cold cutting through me. One morning, the storm was worse than usual. Fat flakes came down sideways, stinging my cheeks. The streets were nearly empty. No one wanted to be out there except me. I was halfway through my route, boots crunching through snowdrifts, when I noticed a garage door lifting ahead of me. The motor whined, and the panel creaked up to reveal a pool of dim yellow light. A man stepped into view. I'd never seen him before. Middle-aged, maybe late 40s, bundled in a heavy jacket with the hood down despite the cold. He had a broad smile that didn't seem to fit the weather or the hour. "Hey there," he called over the wind. His voice carried too easily. I slowed, paper tucked under my arm. He waved, beckoning me closer. "Come on in. Warm up a bit. Got coffee going inside." For a moment, I thought maybe he was just being kind. But something in the way he leaned against the doorway, like he was filling the frame on purpose, set me on edge. I shook my head quickly. "I'm good, thanks. Gotta keep moving." His smile didn't falter. If anything, it widened. He stepped back half an inch, gesturing deeper into the garage. "It's nasty out. No reason to freeze out there. Come in, take a break. Won't hurt." The snow was falling harder, muffling every sound except his voice. I glanced around. No cars, no other people. Just me, him, and the storm. His eyes flicked up and down the street before fixing on me again. I forced a polite smile and took a step back. Really, I've got a lot of ground to cover. Papers won't deliver themselves. His expression twitched. Just for a second, the smile faltered, and something sharper flashed underneath. Then it was back, stretched tight. "Suit yourself," he said lightly. "Stay warm." I nodded and moved on, heart hammering under my coat. I didn't look back, but I felt him watching me until I turned the corner. After that, I couldn't shake it. The rest of my route blurred, but my mind kept circling back to that garage. The way he'd blocked the entrance. The way he'd insisted. The way his smile had slipped just before I walked away. The next morning, I told myself it was nothing. People could be friendly, especially in bad weather. Maybe he really had just wanted to offer me coffee. But when I reached his street, the garage door was cracked open. Just a few inches, not enough to see inside. I tossed his paper onto the step and kept moving, but my chest tightened. The day after that, same thing. The garage, open just a sliver. No man in sight, no sound. But the light inside glowed faintly yellow. By the third day, I started speeding up as I approached. I'd throw the paper hard from a distance and keep my eyes straight ahead, refusing to glance at the gap. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that he was there, hidden, watching. It became a ritual. Every morning, snow or not, the garage door was never fully shut. Always cracked, always lit. Sometimes I imagined I caught movement inside, a shadow shifting, the glint of a face. Once, I swore I heard the faint scrape of boots on concrete as I passed. I never told anyone. What could I say? That a man smiled at me and offered me coffee? That his garage door was half open? People would laugh, tell me I was paranoid. But I knew. I knew that moment in the storm hadn't been harmless. The memory stayed sharp, his eyes scanning the street before locking on me, his too wide smile, his voice just a little too eager. And I knew one thing for certain. If I'd stepped inside, if I'd let myself be lured by warmth and politeness, no one would have seen me again. One morning, weeks later, the storm had passed, leaving a brittle layer of ice over everything. The sun was just rising, painting the snow pink. I walked my route slower, calmer, almost convincing myself I'd been imagining the whole thing. Then I reached his house. The garage door was cracked open as always. But this time I saw him. He was crouched near the back wall, half hidden in shadow. His face was angled toward the gap, eyes catching the light as I approached. I pretended not to notice, tossed the paper, kept walking. My hands shook inside my gloves. My heart slammed so loud I thought he'd hear it. I didn't look back, but I knew. He was still waiting, patient, and my route forced me past his house every single day. Most of my jobs blur together. You go in, you check the wiring, you swap out a breaker or tighten a connection, and you leave. 99% of the time, it's routine, forgettable. But every electrician I know has one call they never forget. This one was mine. I was 34, working for a small service company in the city. We handled everything from office buildings to low-rent apartments. The dispatch came through on a Tuesday morning. Third-floor unit in a rundown complex on the west side. Power cutting in and out. I knew the building. Everyone did. A boxy, decaying brick block with graffiti on the stairwell and broken mailboxes stuffed with junk. The kind of place you double-check your van locks before going inside. I lugged my tool bag up 3 flights, the stairwell stinking of cigarettes and mold. The carpet on the landing was worn down to the threads. The number on the door was half missing, just a crooked 2, hanging by a nail. I knocked. It took a while, then the door creaked open. The man who answered was in his 40s, maybe older. Gaunt face, greasy hair pulled back. He wore a stretched-out sweatshirt and loose sweatpants that sagged at the ankle. That's when I noticed it. The bulky black ankle monitor strapped tight against his leg, blinking a faint green light. "You the electrician?" His voice was flat, low. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "You called about power issues?" He nodded and stepped back, gesturing me inside. The smell hit first. Sour sweat, rot, something chemical underneath. The kind of smell that clings. Inside, the apartment looked like a storage unit gone wrong. Trash piled in corners. Plates with crusted food stacked on a chair. Empty bottles everywhere. And in the middle of it, something worse. Mannequin parts. At first, I thought maybe he collected them, a weird hobby. But no, these weren't clean store displays. The torsos were hacked in half, duct taped at odd angles. Legs leaned against the wall, scuffed, stained. One had a shoe dangling from it. Another had duct tape wrapped tightly around the thighs. I felt my stomach tighten. The man shut the door behind me. "The lights cut out sometimes," he said, moving closer than necessary as I stepped toward the breaker box. "You live around here?" Other side of town, I muttered, crouching down to inspect the panel. My hands shook slightly. The wiring was a mess, but I couldn't focus. I was too aware of him hovering. Too close, watching. "Got a family?" he asked after a beat. I didn't answer. Instead, I pretended to be deeply absorbed in the breaker. My throat was dry. He leaned on the wall, eyes fixed on me. "No one knows you're here, huh? Just doing your job." The words slid under my skin. I forced a quick laugh. Light, like I hadn't caught the undertone. "Yeah, long list of calls today. People waiting." Something flickered in his expression. His lips twitched into a half smile, not friendly. That's when I noticed one of the mannequins more closely, a torso propped against the couch. Duct tape wrapped around its chest, dark stains smeared along the plastic. I didn't want to guess what they were. I needed to get out. I stood abruptly. "I'll need a part from the van," I said quickly, keeping my tone casual. "Should only take a minute." He tilted his head, studying me. The silence stretched. Then he shrugged. "Sure." I slung my bag over my shoulder and walked to the door, trying not to rush. My palms were slick with sweat inside my gloves. When I stepped into the hall, I felt air return to my lungs. "Don't be long," he called after me. I didn't answer. I walked down the stairs, every muscle tense, waiting for him to follow. But he didn't. When I reached the parking lot, I got straight into the van, slammed the lock shut, and sat there gripping the wheel until my heartbeat slowed. I considered calling my boss, the police, someone. But what would I say? That a tenant had mannequins and made me uncomfortable? So I drove away. That night, curiosity gnawed at me. I searched his name from the work order. It didn't take long. He'd been arrested years earlier. Home invasion. Assault. Time served, now monitored. My hands shook as I read the details. A woman attacked in her own flat. Tied up, left beaten but alive. He'd only been caught because a neighbor heard the commotion. I closed the laptop, stomach churning. I still work as an electrician. I still go into strangers' homes. But every time I step into an apartment that smells stale, every time I see a closed garage or basement door, I think about that man. About the mannequins hacked apart and taped like trophies. About the ankle monitor blinking faintly in the dim light. About how his mouth twitched when I told him no one knew where I was. And about how close I came to being another object in a room full of broken parts. When I was 14, my mother left me with my grandmother for 2 weeks. It was supposed to be temporary, just until she could cover a stretch of extra shifts at the hospital. She promised it would go quickly. It didn't. My grandmother lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the top floor of a sagging brick building downtown. Even from the stairwell, I hated the smell, a mix of old incense, sour milk, and something faintly rotten, like garbage that had seeped into the walls. The hallway lights flickered, and her door always seemed to stick, so you had to shove hard to get inside. She was waiting for me when I arrived, standing in the middle of the living room in her nightgown, her lips pressed thin. She wasn't the kind of grandmother other kids bragged about. No cookies, no hugs. She was hard and sharp, and her mind slipped in and out of clarity like a bad radio signal. "Don't touch anything," she snapped before I'd even set down my bag. For 2 weeks, that apartment became a cage. Her voice followed me everywhere. She criticized the way I folded laundry, the way I poured milk, the way I breathed. If she misplaced her keys, it was my fault. If she forgot to take her medicine, she said I'd hidden it. Sometimes she slapped my arm, quick and mean, and told me to pay attention. But the abuse wasn't the worst part. It was the nights. I'd lie awake in the small spare bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening through the thin wall. My grandmother would talk for hours in her raspy voice, holding conversations with someone I never heard answer. Sometimes she laughed softly, a dry, broken laugh. Other times her tone dropped lower, almost like a growl, the words distorted and wrong. The first morning I woke up with bruises, I thought maybe I'd banged my leg against the metal bed frame. But the bruise was too high, on the inside of my thigh, in a place I couldn't have hit. The second morning, there were marks on my upper arm, small, round, like finger imprints. When I asked her about them, she sneered. "Stop scratching yourself in your sleep. You'll drive yourself crazy." I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew those weren't from scratching. The apartment itself seemed to shift the longer I stayed. I noticed symbols scratched faintly into the wood of the door frames. little bundles of twine and feathers tucked behind books on the shelf. Once, I opened a drawer in the kitchen and found a small jar filled with what looked like hair. I shoved it closed before she could see me. The smell of incense was stronger at night, burning my nose, clinging to my clothes. I could never find the sticks, though. It was as if the smoke just seeped out of the walls. One night, I woke to the sound of chanting. The words were harsh, syllables that didn't belong to any language I knew. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. Her voice rose and fell in steady rhythm. And then another voice joined in. Deep, male, right there in the room with her. I froze. My blood turned to ice. But when I finally cracked the door open, the living room was empty. She sat in her chair, rocking slowly, lips moving. Alone, I went back to bed and pulled the blanket over my head, trembling until morning. The 2 weeks crawled by, but I survived. When my mother finally came to pick me up, I clung to her like I hadn't in years. She scolded me for being dramatic, but I saw the way she avoided her mother's eyes as we left. I didn't tell her about the bruises. I didn't tell her about the chanting, or the voices, or the jars of hair. I just wanted to forget, but I couldn't. Years later, when I was in college, my mother and I were talking late one night. She'd been drinking, and her guard was down. We were laughing about something when the conversation turned toward family. You don't know what it was like, she said suddenly, her voice bitter. Growing up with her. I hesitated, then asked, "What do you mean?" She looked at me for a long time before answering. My mother was a Satanist. Always has been. She never stopped. The rituals, the prayers, the sacrifices, she trailed off, shaking her head. That's why she's the way she is. The room spun. Suddenly, everything made sense. The symbols, the feathers, the jars, the chanting, the bruises, the second voice. I wanted to tell her what I'd seen, what I'd felt in that apartment. But I didn't. She didn't need more weight on her shoulders. Instead, I just nodded, pretending I wasn't shaking inside. Even now, years later, the memory clings to me. I'll be brushing my hair, catch a glimpse of a bruise I can't explain, and feel that old fear crawl up my spine. I'll wake from dreams where I hear her voice, not scolding me, but chanting in that deep, guttural rhythm. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I catch a whiff of incense, sharp and sour, with no source. That's when I remember. For 2 weeks, I wasn't just staying with my grandmother. I was staying with whatever else lived in that apartment. It started as a normal night. 6 of us had gone to see a late movie, one of those 10 p.m. showings that doesn't let out until nearly midnight. The theater was almost empty, just a scattering of other groups, and when the credits rolled we filed out laughing, still buzzing about the film. The girls had all come in one car, parked down in the underground garage beneath the mall. I'd driven separately, but when I saw the hour, I offered to walk them down. It wasn't even a question, really. 5 young women in a deserted garage at night. Better to have someone with them. The air changed the second we stepped off the escalator and into the concrete levels below. The hum of the city above faded into an echoing silence. Our voices bounced off pillars, our footsteps sounding too loud. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, leaving stretches of shadow between parked cars. I tried to play it cool, joking about the movie's ending, but something in my gut tightened as we walked deeper into the garage. Their car was on the second level. We turned the corner toward the row where they'd parked, and that's when I noticed movement. Shadows shifting between cars. At first, I thought it was just other late-night moviegoers heading out. But then figures stepped out deliberately, forming a loose half-circle across the aisle. 7 young men. Hoodies, caps pulled low, faces hard. They weren't wandering. They were waiting. The girls stopped behind me. I felt all of them huddle close, their voices dropping to nervous whispers. One of the men pointed at me. "What set you claiming, blue boy?" It took me a second to process. Then I looked down and realized what I was wearing. A bright blue hoodie. My favorite one, the one my brother had given me. The air went electric. I could feel my pulse in my ears. "I'm not," I started, but my voice cracked. They closed in. Not running, not rushing, just tightening the circle. The scrape of shoes on concrete echoed. My friends clutched each other, trying not to cry. One of the men stepped forward, pulling up his shirt just enough to show the glint of a weapon tucked in his waistband. Another lifted his hand, knuckles wrapped in tape, flexing like he was itching for a fight. Wrong colors, wrong place. The first one said, eyes locked on me. Looks like you're lost. I couldn't move. My body was stone. I wanted to say something, to explain, to plead, but my throat had closed. I'd never been in a situation like this. Never had violence pointed directly at me. And the thought of the girls behind me made it worse. If I made one wrong move, it wasn't just me at risk. I heard one of them, Emily, I think, sucking in a shaky breath. Another whispered, "Oh my God," so quietly I almost didn't catch it. Then the leader reached for his waistband. Time slowed. I thought, this is it. This is how I die. Over a hoodie. And then, red and blue light flooded the garage. Shouting erupted. Police. Hands where we can see him. The gang scattered instantly, sprinting into the shadows, vaulting over hoods of cars. Boots pounded the concrete. Tires screeched as cruisers cut across the entrance. Officers poured in, guns drawn, barking commands. I couldn't move. My whole body shook. The girls pulled at me, tugging me backward toward their car, but my legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I kept staring at the empty space where the men had stood, the echo of their footsteps still rattling in my skull. It wasn't until we were huddled in the car, doors locked, that Emily admitted what she'd done. The second she'd seen them step out, she'd slipped her phone from her pocket and dialed 911, whispering into the line as quietly as she could. Her quick thinking saved us. But that didn't erase what I'd seen. The look in their eyes, the way they closed the circle, the moment when I thought my life had already ended. Even now, I can't park in a garage without feeling my throat tighten. The smell of oil and concrete brings it all back. I'll catch myself scanning every shadow, every cluster of strangers, waiting for the circle to close again. Because the worst part wasn't the weapons, or the threats, or even the way they melted into the dark when the police came. The worst part was that moment before the sirens, when I realized no one knew who I was, or what was happening to me, in that silent underground space. And when I understood how easy it would have been for me, and the 5 friends I'd sworn to protect, to disappear into the echo of our own footsteps. It was a Friday evening in late autumn, one of those nights when the daylight drains out too quickly and the road feels lonelier than it should. I'd worked a long shift at the office, stayed later than planned, and by the time I left the parking lot, the sky was already fading to indigo. The drive home took me out of the city, along a stretch of rural highway that wound past fields, small patches of woods, and, about halfway, the old county cemetery. I knew the road well. I'd driven it hundreds of times, always with music blasting to keep myself awake and shake off the dull rhythm of work. That night was no different. I had the radio up too loud, the bass thudding in my chest, my fingers tapping on the wheel. Then, as I approached the bend where the cemetery sat behind its iron fence, something shifted. It wasn't gradual. It hit me like a wave, a sudden heaviness in the air, a weight in my chest, the hairs on my arms rising all at once. A cold dread pressed down on me, so sharp and so immediate I couldn't breathe. My hand shot to the volume knob before I'd even thought about it, twisting it down until the car was silent. The effect was instant. The silence felt thick, almost alive. I drove slower without meaning to. My headlights swept across the stone pillars of the cemetery gates, catching rows of headstones glinting faintly through the bars. The trees around the edges loomed black against the sky. That's when I saw them. Cars lined the narrow shoulder outside the cemetery, headlights still glowing. Beyond the fence, a small group of people stood gathered, dark coats silhouetted against the pale grass. A funeral. The realization struck me like ice water. I'd turned my music off before I even saw it. Before I knew there was anything to be respectful toward. I kept driving, hands tight on the wheel, the silence in the car still heavy. The rest of the ride home felt different. The road was the same, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in the car with me, whispering in my ear, guiding my hand to the radio. The dread that had hit me wasn't the kind that comes from nerves or paranoia. It was purposeful, directed. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the silence had become unbearable, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the radio back on. It felt wrong, like talking loudly in a church. That night, I lay awake replaying it over and over. The jolt of fear, the instinctive turn of my hand, the sight of the mourners. I tried to explain it logically. Maybe I'd seen the glow of headlights ahead, and subconsciously registered what they meant. Maybe the cemetery itself had triggered a guilty sense of superstition. But those explanations didn't sit right. It hadn't felt like a thought I'd had. It had felt like a command. The next week, I drove the same road again. This time in daylight, the cemetery quiet, no cars out front. I kept the music low, though, almost without realizing it. As I passed the gates, a shiver ran through me. It became a habit. Every time I neared the cemetery, I lowered the volume or turned the music off entirely. I told myself it was respect, a simple tradition I'd invented for myself. But in truth, I couldn't shake the idea that someone else was reminding me. That same heaviness would return, not as sharp as that first night, but there, like a hand on my shoulder. Sometimes, when I slowed down enough, I thought I saw movement among the stones. Just flickers, shadows shifting where no one should be. I never looked too long. Months passed, and winter came. One evening, snowflakes swirled in the headlights as I drove the familiar route. My music was on low, more habit than comfort now. As I neared the cemetery, I reached out automatically and muted it. That's when I noticed something strange. The snow hadn't stuck to the road yet, but in front of the cemetery gates, the pavement was dusted white, except for a single stretch where footprints crossed from the woods straight toward the fence. Bare footprints. I pressed harder on the wheel and drove faster. By the time I reached home, my heart was still racing. I've never told anyone about that night. It sounds too small to matter, too strange to explain. How do you describe a moment when dread seizes you, when silence feels alive, when your body moves before your mind? But I know what I felt. I know that the first time, someone warned me. Someone didn't want me blasting music as a casket was lowered into the ground. And I know that ever since, I've been reminded, every single time I drive past that cemetery, that the dead deserve quiet. Because whether I want to or not, I still turn the volume down. And sometimes, in the silence that follows, I can almost hear a whisper of thanks. My mother was already halfway through her second round of chemo when the call came. She'd been tired for days, too tired to sit upright for long, too tired to eat anything but crackers and broth. I was 25, living back at home again after college, trying to keep things from unraveling while everything slowly, quietly did. So when the phone rang that night, and I saw my Aunt Lorna's name flash across the screen, I didn't think much of it. She called every few weeks, usually with some rushed update, always followed by a story that didn't quite add up. I answered on speaker, hands deep in dishwater. Her voice crackled through the line, breathless, giddy. "Claire, I found him." I frowned. "Found who?" "Your uncle," she said, like it should be obvious. "Your mother's brother." My hands froze. Behind me, in the next room, my mother stirred on the couch, but didn't sit up. "Lorna," I said slowly, "Uncle Mark died 30 years ago." "No," she said quickly. "That's what we were told. But he's alive. I'm with him right now. We're on our way to the house." She hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, the quiet hum of the sink suddenly deafening. I turned to look at my mother. She hadn't moved, but her eyes were open. "You heard that?" I asked gently. She nodded once. "She's sick," she whispered. "She's confused. She said she's bringing someone here." At that, my mom sat up straighter than I'd seen her in days. Her hand gripped the edge of the blanket. "Don't let her in, Claire. I'm serious. If she comes, you lock the door." I hesitated. "She's your sister. My brother is dead. Uncle Mark had died before I was born. A car accident in another state. A truck slammed into his sedan, threw it off the road, and into a ravine. It took hours to recover the body, days to bury it. My mother only spoke about him when asked, and even then, only in fragments. He'd been the quiet sibling, the kind one. He used to sing. He'd never married. His death gutted her. Aunt Lorna, on the other hand, always clung to the idea that he might have lived, that something had gone wrong with the identification, that there was a mix-up. She never let it go, but even she had never done this before. 20 minutes after the call, headlights swept across our windows. I was standing near the front door, heart thudding. My mother had moved to the hallway, pale and trembling. "Claire," she said firmly, "do not open that door." I nodded, but I had to look. The car was Lorna's old sedan, the engine still running. She was behind the wheel, hunched forward like she was gripping the steering wheel too hard. Her face was lit in flashes from the dashboard. In the passenger seat sat a man. I couldn't see him clearly. The shadows swallowed half of his face, but what I did see made my stomach knot. He looked blank, expressionless. His eyes were open, staring forward, unfocused. Lorna's window rolled down an inch. "Claire," she called. "Come out. Say hello to your uncle." I didn't move. She looked frantic, her hair disheveled, her eyes wide and glistening with something between joy and desperation. "I told you," she said, her voice cracking. "I told you he wasn't dead. He's right here." I took a single step forward, and the man in the passenger seat turned, slowly, like a puppet moved by strings. He didn't speak. He looked nothing like the few faded photos I'd seen of Uncle Mark. He was younger, or maybe older. His face was oddly smooth, the skin pale and shiny. His eyes were dark, too dark. I swallowed. "What's his name?" I asked. Lorna hesitated. "Mark." I nodded slowly. "Okay, but what's his name?" She flinched like I'd struck her. "It's him," she whispered. "I know it's him. I saw him walking on the road this afternoon." I knew right away. He didn't remember at first, but when I brought him into the car, he started to. "He's been quiet, but it's him. He's come home." The man said nothing. Behind me, I heard the soft sound of a lock turning, my mother securing the back door. I took another step toward the car, almost without meaning to, and then the man smiled. It was small, subtle, but there was something wrong about it, something that didn't reach his eyes. I backed up, slowly, heart pounding. "I'm sorry, Aunt Lorna, but I can't let you in." Her face collapsed into something pained and furious. "Why?" she demanded. "Don't you see him? Don't you know him?" "He's not Uncle Mark," I said, voice shaking. "He's someone else." She slapped the wheel, screamed a sound that didn't have words. The man beside her didn't react. Then she threw the car into reverse, tires screeching against the gravel, and backed down the driveway without another word. We watched from the window as her taillights disappeared into the dark. She never explained it. When I called her the next day, she said she didn't know what I was talking about. She hadn't visited us. She hadn't found anyone. Her voice was calm. In the months that followed, she unraveled. Her memory got worse. She started forgetting her medications. She stopped calling. Eventually, we had to help place her in assisted care. But my mother never forgot. "She brought something here that night," she told me once. "I don't know what. But that man, that wasn't your uncle." I agreed. Sometimes, when I dream, I see the car idling in our driveway, the headlights dim, the engine humming low. I see my aunt's face, wild and hopeful, and the man beside her, unmoving, his mouth twitching into a smile that still wakes me in the middle of the night. I don't know who he was, or what my aunt saw when she looked at him, but I know what I felt when his eyes met mine, and it wasn't recognition. It was warning. I've always liked driving alone at night. There's something peaceful about the emptiness, the rhythm of the road stretching out ahead. That night, I was heading south from Logan to Provo after a weekend with my sister. I'd made the drive a dozen times before, long, straight stretches of State Route 89 cutting through the open dark, surrounded by nothing but desert, rock, and scattered pinpricks of light from sleeping towns. It was almost 11 p.m. when I left Logan. I had snacks in the passenger seat, a full tank, and a podcast playing low. The sky was clear, and the roads were dry. Everything felt normal, until I noticed the truck. A white pickup, older model, maybe early 2000s. Plain, no visible logos or bumper stickers. It first appeared behind me just south of Mantua, when the road opened into that long two-lane stretch that seems to go on forever. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Cars pass, cars follow, it's just highway traffic. But this one didn't pass. It didn't tailgate either. It stayed a consistent 2 or 3 car lengths behind me. When I sped up, it sped up. When I eased off the gas, it did the same. I switched lanes. So did it. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they were just heading the same way. But after 30 miles, the pattern didn't change. I took an exit I didn't need, a little off-ramp leading toward a closed way station. The kind of exit you only use if you're a trucker or taking a break. I looped down, slowed almost to a stop, then merged back on. The truck followed. Same distance, same steady pace. At that point, I turned the podcast off and lowered the music. My hands tightened on the wheel. I tried to think logically. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe the driver didn't even realize they were making me nervous. But then I signaled left and drifted across the dotted line, testing again. The truck mirrored me. Not aggressive, not erratic, just perfectly timed. Like it was watching. I passed a sign for a gas station. One of those older ones that stays open late only because the highway feeds it a trickle of customers. I decided to pull in, not to get gas, but to see if the truck would stop too. As I approached the turnoff, my pulse thudded. I took the curve fast, tires crunching into the lot's loose gravel. The gas station lights were bright, almost too bright after the dark of the road. The place was nearly empty except for a rusted van and a bored-looking cashier behind glass. The white truck followed, but it didn't stop at the pumps. It kept moving, slow and smooth, and turned behind the adjacent building, an old diner that had clearly been closed for years. The windows were boarded, the sign half broken, the lot unlit. I waited and waited, but the truck never came back around. No engine sound, no taillights, no movement. I circled the building once in my own car, creeping forward with my brights on. Nothing. No sign of the truck. No side road it could have taken. Just the dark lot, the sagging diner, and silence. I pulled into a parking space by the station and went inside. The cashier barely looked up. "Hey," I said, voice tighter than I meant it to be. "Do you have security cameras outside?" He blinked. "Why?" There was a truck following me. It pulled in right after me and then vanished behind that diner. I hesitated. I know it sounds weird. He just looked at me for a second. Then he nodded slowly. "White pickup?" he asked. My stomach dropped. "Yeah. Old model." I nodded. He leaned on the counter. "You're not the first. Seen a few folks come in here looking like you do." Shaken. "What is it?" I asked. "Some freak following people?" He shrugged. Could be. Could be someone messing around. Could be nothing." Then he looked me dead in the eye and said, "But every person who's told me about it says the exact same thing. White truck. Never passes. Never drops back. Just follows. For miles. Then disappears." I stood there, heart pounding. The hum of the fridge coolers in the back sounded too loud, too artificial. I bought a bottle of water just to do something with my hands. When I walked back outside, the lot was still empty. No headlights. No movement. I didn't see the truck again that night. But the story doesn't end there. Over the next year, I drove that same route a few more times, always during the day, always scanning my rear view more than I needed to. And one night, months later, a friend texted me from that road. "Weird question," she wrote. "Have you ever been followed by a white truck out past Brigham City?" My blood ran cold. She described everything the same. The distance, the silence, the exact mimicry of her speed and lane changes. She'd pulled over. The truck had driven past. But when she got back on the road, it was behind her again. I never told her my story until that night. Now, when I drive alone, especially at night, I always check behind me. If I see a white pickup, I take a different road. I wait until it passes. And if it doesn't, if it just keeps following, I don't try to confront it anymore. I just find somewhere public, stay under the lights, and wait. Because whatever's driving that truck, it doesn't want to be found. And I'm not interested in learning what happens if you try. I was too tired to be picky. That's the only reason I stayed there. I'd been on the road for 6 hours after finishing a hellish shift in Ely, Nevada, 12 hours in the ER on my feet, barely time to eat, adrenaline keeping me upright. I was headed to a contract assignment in St. George, but I couldn't make it another mile. When I hit Cedar City around 11:15 p.m., I pulled off the highway and started scanning for anything with vacancy and a cheap rate. That's how I ended up at the Deseret Inn. It sat just off the main road, half hidden behind a row of dark trees. The old neon sign buzzed dimly in red and blue, flickering the word vacancy like it couldn't make up its mind. The parking lot was cracked and mostly empty. There were maybe 3 other cars. I almost kept driving. The place looked like a postcard from 1987 left out in the rain. But my eyes were dry and burning, and my hands were starting to shake from exhaustion. I just needed 6 hours of unconsciousness. Nothing more. The man at the front desk looked half asleep himself, sitting behind a faded counter, lit by a single fluorescent bulb. His uniform shirt was wrinkled, no name tag. He handed me an old-fashioned key, not a card, a key, and pointed toward room 4, ground floor, right by the ice machine. "Checkout's at 11, he mumbled. "Perfect," I said. I didn't even unpack. Just locked the door, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed into the stiff bedspread, still wearing my hoodie. The TV was a dead flat screen bolted to the wall. The remote didn't work, and I didn't care. I was out cold in under 5 minutes. I woke up at 2:37 a.m. exactly. I remember the numbers because I looked at the cheap plastic alarm clock on the nightstand, blinking in the dark. At first, I didn't know what had woken me. Then I heard it again. Knock. Pause. Knock. Pause. Knock. Pause. Knock. For slow, deliberate knocks. Not on the main door. On the adjoining door, the one that led to the room next door. I sat up, heart hammering. I wasn't sure what I'd heard. The room was freezing, even though the heater was running. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and waited. Nothing. No voice. No footsteps. Just silence. I got up and walked to the door, the one that connected room 4 to room 5. It had one of those flimsy slide locks at the top. I checked it. Still locked. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. Silence. Then I called the front desk. The same man answered after a few rings, groggy. "Hi. Sorry to bother you," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Someone just knocked on the adjoining door in my room. I'm in room 4. Could you check if someone's staying next door?" There was a long pause. I heard paper rustling. "No one's in room 5, he said finally. "Hasn't been anyone in there for a while." Then why did someone knock on the door? Maybe someone from another room wandered. "I'll take a look." But he didn't sound convinced. I hung up and moved the desk chair over, wedging it tightly under the handle of the adjoining door. It squeaked a little as I pushed it into place. Then I climbed back into bed, eyes fixed on the shadowy outline of the door. I didn't sleep again that night. When dawn finally came, I waited until full daylight before getting up. The room looked different in the morning. Cheaper, sadder, the wallpaper curling at the edges, the carpet stained beyond help. I went to the door, the one with the chair under it. The chair had shifted. Not far, just a few inches, as if nudged from the other side. The door was cracked open. Only a few inches. I stood there frozen for a full minute. Then I reached forward and slowly pushed the door open. The room beyond wasn't occupied. It was gutted. No bed, no furniture, no lamps. Just dust-covered floors, a cracked mirror on the wall, and a tarp crumpled in the corner. It looked like someone had started renovating it 5 years ago and gave up. But what made my skin crawl was the floor. The dust was thick, untouched, except for a single drag mark, cutting through the center of the room, starting from the far corner and stopping directly in front of the adjoining door, like something had been pulled toward me in the night. I slammed the door, locked it again, grabbed my bag, and got the hell out. The front desk was empty when I went to check out. No clerk, no sign of anyone. Just a silent lobby and a bowl of dusty peppermints on the counter. I waited 5 minutes, called out twice. Nothing. So I left the key on the counter and walked out. I never got a receipt. Later that day, after I'd made it to St. George and caught up on sleep, I tried to look up the motel. I couldn't find a website. No recent reviews. Just a single line on a travel site that made my blood run cold. The Deseret Inn, permanently closed since 2020. I stared at the screen for a long time. That wasn't just a clerical error. That place hadn't just gone out of business. The room I stayed in was real. The key was real. I still had a charge on my card. But according to the internet, the Deseret Inn hadn't been open for over 3 years. It's the dust that I can't stop thinking about. That room was empty. The drag mark was fresh. But there were no footprints. No smudges. Just a single streak through the powdery floor, like something crawled, or was dragged, from that back corner to the door where I was sleeping. The knocks were real. The voice I never heard. The silence that followed. It was all real. I still don't know what happened that night. All I know is that I was never supposed to be in that room. And something on the other side of that door knew it.